He vanished without a sound on a summer night in 1992. No struggle, no witness, just a radio call that ended in static. For 9 years, there were no answers, only theories buried beneath silence and time. But when a highway crew broke ground on a stretch of I-80, their jackhammer struck metal, twisted, rusted, and marked with a badge number long thought lost. What they uncovered wasn't just a body. It was a question no one was ready to ask. How do you bury a man without ever letting him die? The wind came first. It howled across the open plain like something ancient and unkind, carrying the sharp scent of rusted road salt and the exhaust of long-haul trucks that disappeared into the vanishing point of the horizon. It was the kind of wind that made men look over their shoulders without knowing why. The kind that pressed into skin, that whispered of things left undone. It was late October when the highway crew arrived at mile marker 223, not far from the edge of a service pullout barely used since the early 90s. The crew wasn't there for anything mysterious, just a long overdue repaving job scheduled by the state after one too many frost heaves had buckled the concrete. Before we walk deeper into the cracks, where concrete forgets and silence holds its breath, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support isn't just digital, it's a footprint on an abandoned road, a flashlight flickering in the dark where no one's looked for years. Every subscription is a whisper to the lost. You are not forgotten. You help unearth what others paved over. Thank you for listening when the world buried the truth beneath the noise. Routine, mundane. Something about the way they moved suggested boredom, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. No one expected anything unusual to happen, and that's often when it does. The shovel hit something solid around 9:42 a.m. The man who wielded it, Donnie Kerrigan, a wiry operator with 30 years under his belt, expected gravel or pipe, maybe a hunk of rebar left behind by the last crew. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of steel meeting stone. It rang sharper, hollower, like something that didn't belong beneath layers of road. Donnie crouched, brushed aside a clump of broken asphalt and clay, and stared. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. A curve of metal, too uniform for debris, painted, flaked blue and white. Another few minutes of digging revealed a portion of crumpled glass, yellowed with time, the ghost of a badge number etched faintly into the corner. That's when he stopped. The machines fell silent one by one, their hydraulic limbs lowering like confused animals sensing a storm. The foreman radioed it in. State police were notified. Work was halted. Men stood in reflective vests and stared into the wound in the earth they had opened, and none of them said it aloud, but all of them felt the same thing. This was not just a car. This was a grave. Somewhere beneath the layers of concrete and time, under the weight of passing trucks and the silence of bureaucracy, something had waited to be found. Not everything stays buried. Some things fight their way back, piece by piece. A seatbelt clasp, a shattered radio, a bone, memories that have no place returning. And just like that, the past had reached up from under the highway and grabbed hold. The investigators arrived by noon, their presence quiet but heavy, like undertakers at the scene of an unfinished funeral. They didn't speak much either. Only one of them, a woman in a long black coat, lingered longer than the rest. She stared at the twisted wreckage with a look that didn't ask what this was. It asked who. As she turned to leave, she said something to no one in particular. Her voice barely carried over the wind, but one of the crewmen heard it. Later, he couldn't remember if it was really spoken aloud, or if he only imagined it. Still, the words stuck with him, carved like initials into soft wood. Some disappearances don't stay buried. And then the wind picked up again. The radio call came through at 11:07 p.m. It was a routine check-in, clipped and clear. Unit 6 responding. Mile 219, I-80 westbound. Vehicle pulled off shoulder, hazard lights active. The dispatcher responded with a simple acknowledgement. Nothing in the tone, nothing in the exchange, gave any hint that it would be the last time anyone would hear Deputy Thomas Granger's voice. He was 27, rookie by years, but seasoned in temperament. Tommy Never Tom had a quiet reputation among the force. Reliable, methodical, and the kind of man who showed up early to shifts and stayed late to finish paperwork others left behind. He didn't make a lot of noise, but you remembered him. He wore his uniform like it meant something sacred, not performative. There was something old-fashioned in him, like he might have belonged to another era. The kind of man who still tipped his hat when he passed someone on the street. It was a Wednesday night when he vanished. The sky above the Nebraska highway heavy with summer thunderclouds, moonlight smothered by their weight. Visibility was low, but not impossible. The kind of night that makes the road feel longer than it is, as if every mile stretches into something uncharted. Tommy's last confirmed location was on the westbound shoulder of I-80. A disabled sedan, hazards blinking like a warning no one listened to. Witness accounts are thin, just a long-haul trucker who remembered passing a cruiser with lights on. No figures outside, no sense of urgency, just a sliver of official presence on the edge of the dark. Minutes later, when dispatch tried to follow up, there was no reply. The line hissed with static, calls repeated, each one a little sharper, a little more insistent. Silence answered them all. By 11:45, another unit was sent to check. They found nothing, no cruiser, no sedan, no tire tracks. Just wind, heat lightning far off, and the long groan of the interstate humming into the night. It took hours before they expanded the search. Days before it turned into a full-scale manhunt. Helicopters buzzed overhead, local volunteers combed the fields. Dive teams checked shallow drainage canals. State patrols fanned out in every direction. But the road gave back nothing. Not a boot print. Not a scrap of cloth. Tommy Granger had disappeared as if he'd never existed at all. His family clung to hope. His mother Mary refused to believe he was gone, even as seasons passed. She left the porch light on for 9 years. Every night, she said it was for him. She said, if he ever found his way back, she wanted him to know the house still remembered. His partner, Trooper Carl Danner, became a ghost in his own right. He had called in sick that night, a stomach flu, he claimed. It was supposed to be a solo patrol. Routine. Instead, it carved a hole in his life he never spoke about. No funeral was ever held. No body, no badge returned. Only a folded uniform in a locker that smelled faintly of cologne and paper. In the official reports, it was labeled as unresolved disappearance in the line of duty. But in the hearts of those who knew him, Tommy didn't vanish. He was taken by something no one ever saw coming. And in that void, a different kind of story began to form. Not in what was found, but in what was left behind. Carl Danner never liked photographs. He used to say they caught people mid-blink or half-smiling, always frozen in ways that never matched the truth of a moment. But there were still photos, dozens of them. Grainy department shots with dates stamped in fading red. Holiday barbecues where uniforms were traded for denim and t-shirts. Award banquets where medals glinted under fluorescent lights. And in nearly every one of them, Carl stood beside Tommy Granger. Tommy had been assigned to Danner fresh out of academy. The pairing wasn't a choice, it was protocol. Senior officers trained new deputies, showed them the back roads, the tricks for staying alert during long night shifts, how to talk someone down from doing something they couldn't take back. At first, Danner had treated Tommy like any other rookie, curt, hands off, all business. But over time, something changed. Tommy wasn't soft, but he had a kind of quiet empathy that cut through Danner's cynicism. The kid listened. He asked questions that weren't just about the job, but about the people they were sworn to protect. Somewhere, in the rhythm of shared patrols and diner coffees at 3 a.m., They became more than partners. They became brothers in all but blood. That made what happened on July 22, 1992, impossible to carry. Carl had called out sick. A stomach bug, he told dispatch. It hadn't seemed serious, just enough nausea to keep him off the road. Tommy had insisted he could cover the route alone. "Go get some sleep," he said over the phone. "I got it." The words looped in Carl's head for years after. "I got it." They were the last thing Tommy ever said to him. In the weeks after the disappearance, Danner barely spoke. He answered questions, gave statements, walked investigators through Tommy's last known patrol route, but something had shifted behind his eyes. He looked less like a man in mourning, and more like someone staring into a mirror and not recognizing who looked back. People noticed. The other deputies said Carl stopped laughing at jokes, stopped going out after shift. He volunteered for solo patrols, often choosing the stretch of I-80 where Tommy was last seen. Like he believed he could find something that had been missed. Like he was chasing a ghost that wouldn't stop running. He kept Tommy's side of the locker untouched. Some nights, he would sit there alone in the dark of the locker room, a cup of bad coffee in hand, staring at the neatly folded uniform that would never be worn again. A quiet ritual of penance that no one interrupted. Years passed, and Carl aged faster than he should have. His beard grew in white before his time. He developed a tremor in his right hand. No medical reason, they said. Stress, maybe. Or grief manifesting in the body. He never asked for a new partner. When a recruit was assigned to him in 1997, Carl refused, requested reassignment, and was granted a desk post. He kept Tommy's photo on that desk, not the official department one. This was different, a candid shot from a fishing trip they'd taken just before everything unraveled. Tommy was holding up a base, grinning, the sun hitting his cheek just right. Carl never looked at the camera in that photo. He was off to the side, half-shadowed. Like he'd already started disappearing too. By the time they found the car beneath the asphalt, Carl Danner had been retired for 3 years. He didn't attend the press conference. He didn't give a statement. But a week later, the foreman of the highway crew received a call from an unknown number. A voice on the other end said just one thing. "Check the frame, you'll find the badge." Then he hung up. Some people disappear without a trace. Others remain behind, tethered to the world by guilt, by memory, by the hollow shape of someone they couldn't save. Carl Danner didn't vanish. But in every way that mattered, part of him never left that roadside in 1992. By the end of that summer, the posters had curled at the edges. Rain had bled the ink into faint ghosts of faces, and the tape that once held them to gas pumps and diner windows had peeled into brittle ribbons. The photo of Deputy Thomas Granger smiling, crisp in uniform, slowly faded beneath a layer of dust and disinterest. In the town of Willow Creek, people still remembered, but fewer and fewer were willing to say his name. At first, the disappearance had shaken the town to its core. A young deputy, gone without a trace. No wreck, no blood, no final transmission. For weeks, the air felt heavier, like the weather had turned against them. Churches held candlelight vigils. The school painted a mural in his memory. Every conversation in the grocery store aisle or outside the post office seemed to spiral back to Tommy. What really happened that night? Why wasn't he found? But time, even in a town as small and steady as Willow Creek, has a way of dulling sharp edges. As the search dragged on, hope began to sour. Some whispered theories they barely believed themselves. Tommy ran off, joined a cult, staged his own vanishing. Others claimed darker things. That he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to, that he'd been silenced. That maybe someone inside the department knew more than they let on. But theories give way to fatigue. And fatigue, over time, becomes apathy. The highway signs bearing Tommy's name erected by the county as a symbolic gesture stood tall at first, fresh blue and white against the endless road. But no one maintained them. By year 5, the paint had chipped. By year 7, a layer of grime covered the lettering. New drivers passed them without a second glance. The signs became background noise to the endless hum of tires over pavement. In town, even the stories began to rot. Newer families who hadn't lived there in '92 barely registered the case. For them, it was just another rumor, something vague and half-remembered, like a local legend told once and then let go. Kids growing up after the disappearance would point to the roadside pull-off near mile marker 219 and say it was haunted, but they didn't know why. They just liked how it sounded. The investigation file sat in a dusty cabinet in the sheriff's substation, marked open but inactive. Requests for outside help dwindled. The task force dissolved. No new leads surfaced. The truth, or whatever version of it had once been within reach, settled deeper into the layers of silence like silt at the bottom of a slow-moving river, undisturbed, forgotten. Mary Granger, Tommy's mother, kept calling the department every few months. For years, her voice trembled with urgency. Later, it was quiet, resigned, as though she was apologizing for asking at all. Eventually, she stopped calling too. Even Carl Danner, who had once stalked the road's edge like a ghost searching for its anchor, gave up his patrol. The people who had been closest to Tommy stopped speaking about him, not out of callousness, but because grief like that calcifies into something private. Something too heavy to carry aloud. And so the town did what so many towns do, in the face of a mystery it cannot solve. It folded itself around the absence, reshaped daily life around the hollow space, and chose to forget. Not all at once, but slowly, deliberately. Like turning away from a mirror that no longer reflects what you want to see. But beneath it all, something remained. Buried in concrete and time. A truth that didn't care about memory or rumors or whether anyone still believed. It waited. Unchanged. As the town moved on above it, as laughter returned to the streets and the summer parades passed by the old sheriff's office without pause, the truth didn't move. It settled. And it stayed. Winter returned first. The same brittle frost that had rimmed the grasses along I-80 inches the days after Tommy Granger vanished came back the next year and the next, coating the fields in silence. Snow fell in layers, not deep, but persistent, and the shoulder where his last known stop occurred became just another drift-covered edge of an indifferent highway. The patrol car didn't reappear. No tire marks surfaced beneath the thaw. Just more earth. More forgetting. The spring after he vanished, the town planted trees along Main Street, pear blossoms that bloomed bright and defiant. They flourished, even as the memorial plaque at the courthouse entrance dulled with rain. Time, it seemed, only ever moved in one direction. Life insisted on continuing. Tommy's mother aged in photographs. Each year, her hair lost more of its color. Her eyes grew fainter at the corners, not from sight, but from the weight behind them. In the first year, she gave interviews. By the third, she declined them. By the fifth, the calls stopped coming. The yellowed newspapers stacked in her garage, each front page with his name or face sat untouched in plastic bins. One headline read, "Deputy vanishes without a trace." Another, "Community vows to never forget." But memory is a fragile promise. In the sheriff's office, the folder labeled Granger, T, thickened only with redundancy. Duplicate witness statements, the same 3 theories repeated in different handwriting. Rumors scribbled into the margins, none of them credible. Over time, even the officers who had once pored over the case began to treat it like an old wound. Always there, never healing, but rarely acknowledged. The badge number stayed retired, untouched in the records, a gesture that felt less like honor and more like a placeholder for grief that didn't know where to go. Every so often, something would stir. A man found in Utah without ID. A transient who claimed to have seen a deputy locked in a barn 2 states away. Each time, hope flared briefly like a match, and then burned out under scrutiny. The tips were false, the leads were empty, and the waiting resumed. Carl Danner visited the site once a year, always in July. He parked off the shoulder, stepped out of his truck, and stared out into the field like he expected something to blink back. He never stayed long. Just long enough to smoke a cigarette, the only time anyone ever saw him do it, then leave without a word. He never brought flowers, never prayed. Just stood there, rigid, as if measuring the weight of the emptiness itself. Meanwhile, the highway changed. Not in major ways, just the small, quiet shifts that occur when no one pays attention. New reflectors. A guardrail replaced. Faded lines repainted. The land swallowed the evidence, inch by inch, not out of malice, but because time has no sense of justice. Birthdays came and went. Tommy's would have been 30, then 35. A decade passed in fragments. Children grew up not knowing his name. Some who once searched for him moved away, married, divorced, forgot. 9 years is a long time to hold your breath. In the end, the silence became part of the landscape, baked into the concrete, blown across the plains, soaked into the foundations of the town. No one expected anything to change. The investigation was cold. The story unfinished. Closure wasn't just missing, it no longer felt possible. And so, the world moved forward. Until the road broke open. It was early October 2001 when the state road crew arrived just west of Willow Creek. The sun hung low in the sky, its light pale and washed out, casting the long stretch of I-80 inches a tired, indifferent gold. The season was changing. The air carried that brittle edge of cold that warned winter wasn't far behind, and the men moved with the slow rhythm of routine. Hard hats, coffee and thermoses, jokes passed between yawns. It was just another stretch of highway. Just another day. Mile marker 223 had been on the list for a while. Subsurface cracks had formed over the years, hairline fractures that spidered across the asphalt like veins. Nothing unusual. The crew had torn up dozens of similar sections before. Dig, strip, pour, repave. There wasn't supposed to be anything beneath that slab except gravel, conduit, and decades of nothing. The jackhammer started up around 10:15 a.m. Its chatter echoing off the wide-open plains. Dust kicked up in small clouds. One operator, a younger guy named Eric Bell, worked the machinery while the others cleared loose debris. It was loud, mechanical, thoughtless work. Until it wasn't. The noise changed, first a hollow thud instead of the expected grind. Then a sharp metallic screech that rang out and silenced the rest of the machines around it. The jackhammer stuttered, coughed, then stopped altogether, its bit bent at an odd angle. Eric stepped back, blinking through a veil of concrete dust, and motioned for the others to come look. Beneath the fractured surface, something unexpected glinted under the debris. It was metal, but not the kind that belonged to roadwork. Curved, painted, blue. Another layer down revealed shattered glass and a warped, rusted frame. One of the men, Donnie Kerrigan, the foreman, knelt beside the exposed fragment and squinted at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood up, slowly, and told everyone to step back. They cleared more by hand, careful now, as if they had stumbled onto something sacred or dangerous. What emerged wasn't a pipe or old construction debris. It was the roof of a car, or what was left of one. The body had been flattened beneath the concrete's weight, collapsed inward like something buried alive and then forgotten. The paint was barely intact, faded almost to gray. But a small part of the driver's side door still bore the outline of white lettering, 3 digits. A unit number. Beneath that, the faint curve of a sheriff's star. Everything stopped. The crew went silent, instinctively stepping away, the sound of boots crunching gravel loud against the sudden quiet. No one said the words out loud, but they all knew. This wasn't just a car, this wasn't just an accident. It took less than an hour for law enforcement to arrive, and within 2, The site was cordoned off under crime scene tape that flapped in the wind like a warning. A drone of news helicopters circled overhead by sunset, and floodlights were set up to continue work through the night. But even before the body was exhumed, before any identification was confirmed, before the forensics teams whispered the word that had lingered in the air for 9 long years, the locals already knew. The road had finally given up its secret. Someone had been buried here. Not by nature, not by chance. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it stayed that way. They dug through the night, slow and methodical, as though afraid of what each inch might reveal. Floodlights cast long shadows across the excavation site, bathing the broken concrete and twisted rebar in a cold, sterile glow. The hum of generators filled the silence, a low mechanical breath that seemed to tremble under the weight of the moment. By dawn, the shape was unmistakable. A patrol cruiser, crushed and sealed beneath the interstate like some kind of tomb. The roof had caved in under the pressure of years, the frame warped and sunken, but the vehicle's identity remained intact. The make and model matched the standard issue for Nebraska deputies in the early 90s. The paint, though corroded, still clung in patches to the metal, a dull blue-gray that had once shone bright. The passenger side door was bent inward, fused with earth and steel, but on the driver's side, the window was mostly intact, clouded by dirt and time. Inside, slumped against the seat, was the skeleton. Still seated. Still strapped in. The uniform, remarkably preserved in places, bore the familiar tan and brown of the county sheriff's department. The brass buttons had dulled, but one remained legible, the engraved seal of the state. The name tag had long since corroded away, but there was no mistaking who it was. The badge had slipped into the lap of the figure, pinned by the weight of time and silence. Tommy Granger. Or what was left of him. They worked in respectful silence as the body was carefully removed. A coroner's team on site cataloged the position, the evidence, every inch of the surrounding earth. Even after nearly a decade, the seatbelt had remained locked. The radio mic dangled from its coil, still plugged into the shattered dashboard. The cruiser's engine had fused to the concrete below, melted through years of pressure and heat. It looked like the earth had swallowed it whole. But one fact changed everything. The last repaving of that section of I-80 had been done in 1996, 5 years after Tommy Granger disappeared. The official records were clear: contracts, invoices, crew logs. That part of the highway had been torn up, rebuilt, and covered over again. So how could a fully intact patrol vehicle, complete with a body, be buried beneath it? The implications were staggering. Either someone had staged this with almost impossible precision, or someone had buried Tommy long after he was declared missing right in plain sight. Time twisted under the weight of the discovery. For years, everyone had believed that if Tommy had died that night in 1992, it would have been sudden, somewhere off the side of the road. A crash, a confrontation, a misstep into the dark. But this wasn't quick. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. The medical examiner didn't say much, only that the remains showed no signs of immediate trauma, no bullet wounds, no fractures consistent with a high-speed impact. And while decay had robbed the body of many answers, the estimation of death, the condition of the soft tissue, the presence of insect activity suggested something far worse. Tommy hadn't died in 1992. He had died much later. Someone had kept him alive. And someone had made sure that when he was finally gone, he'd be hidden forever, buried beneath the very road he once patrolled. Beneath a layer of concrete poured not by accident, but by design. The road hadn't just covered him. It had concealed the truth. The body arrived at the state forensic lab under escort, a quiet convoy of unmarked vehicles that moved without sirens or urgency. There was no rush anymore. The dead weren't going anywhere. And this one had waited long enough. Dr. Evelyn Marrow was the forensic pathologist assigned to the case. She had seen her share of strange over 20 years. Murders passed off as suicides, lost children found in unmarked graves, remains so degraded they blurred the line between human and earth. But nothing had prepared her for the contradictions sealed inside the remains of Deputy Thomas Granger. The skeletal structure was largely intact. No major fractures, no evidence of violent trauma to the skull or chest cavity. The hands were still gloved, fingers curled slightly inward as though he'd been gripping the steering wheel until the very end. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. It looked, for all the world, as if he had simply gone to sleep behind the wheel and never woken up. But that explanation didn't hold. Tissue samples, limited though they were, told a different story. Certain proteins had degraded in ways that were inconsistent with a 9-year decomposition. More telling was the presence of adipocere grave wax forming along parts of the torso and legs, a condition that only forms under specific circumstances: moisture, isolation, and most importantly, time. Not 9 years. 3. Maybe 4. No more. Dr. Marrow ran the timeline again, checked it against every record she could access. Tommy Granger had vanished in July of 1992. His cruiser had been buried under a layer of asphalt poured in 1996. That much was documented. Which meant he had either been interred in a sealed environment long after his disappearance, or someone had kept him alive for years before placing him in that car. The toxicology panel came back inconclusive, as expected with remains this old. But trace amounts of benzodiazepines were present in the bone marrow. Sedatives. Not lethal doses, but consistent with prolonged exposure. The kind used to keep someone quiet. Malleable. Controlled. She examined the stomach contents, what little remained. The tests revealed plant matter, traces of rice, processed food, nothing that could have come from wilderness survival. Someone had been feeding him. Regularly, purposefully. The truth started to coalesce, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, creeping certainty. Tommy Granger had not died the night he vanished. He had been alive, somewhere, hidden, maintained like a prisoner or a secret. And when he was no longer needed, when the end finally came, he was returned to the very place the world had searched, then forgotten. Buried beneath a road that would see thousands of cars pass overhead, unaware of the man entombed in silence just feet below. Dr. Marrow wrote her report in language as clinical as possible. But between the lines, horror lingered. The contradictions refused to resolve into clarity. There was no wound to explain his death. No environmental clue to suggest how or why it had happened. Only the slow evidence of captivity, of time stolen. The final cause of death was left as undetermined. But the time of death, estimated somewhere between 1997 and 1998, became a rupture in the narrative. It rewrote everything the town had believed. It meant Tommy had outlived his own search, that while his mother kept the porch light on, while the town moved on, while Danner haunted the edge of memory like a ghost, Tommy had been somewhere in the dark waiting. The autopsy didn't bring closure. It brought a question no one wanted to answer. Who had kept Tommy Granger alive all those years? And why had they waited so long to let him die? Rumors spread like wild grass under dry wind. Once the forensic report quietly slipped through official channels confirming what no one wanted to believe, the floodgates cracked. Not just the press, but the town itself, as if all the silence of the past 9 years had been nothing more than a dam waiting to rupture. People who once stopped speaking Tommy Granger's name now couldn't stop. But it wasn't reverence anymore. It was speculation, unease, fear masked as curiosity. The idea that he had been alive somewhere, somehow for years after that night, gnawed at the edge of every conversation. Shopkeepers swapped stories with lowered voices. Had anyone seen him? Had there been sightings, moments dismissed too quickly? A shadow in the wrong place, a man who looked familiar and then vanished again? The disappearance had always been a mystery. But now, it was something else. Now it was impossible. The local paper ran the headline in bold, "Deputy may have lived years after vanishing." It was picked up nationally within days. News vans parked outside the sheriff's office. Reporters buzzed at the county coroner's house like flies. Every unanswered question from 1,992 now carried teeth. Who fed him? Who restrained him? Where was he kept? And how, in a town this small, could someone have hidden a man for 5 years? Theories ignited like dry tinder. Some insisted it had to be someone on the inside, someone with access, someone with a uniform. Others spoke of secret bunkers, of old sheds buried deep in the Nebraskan farmland. One woman, a retired nurse, swore she'd heard weeping behind the walls of an abandoned storage unit just outside town in 1995. She hadn't told anyone then. Now, her silence felt like a confession. And then, just as the storm hit its peak, Carl Danner reappeared. He hadn't been seen since the discovery. No statement, no contact. People assumed he was gone for good, swallowed by the same grief that had kept him silent for years. But on the morning of October 19th, he was seen walking through the center of Willow Creek, thinner than anyone remembered, wearing a coat too big for his now bent frame. His hair, once salt and pepper, had turned shock white. His eyes looked hollow, as if something inside had been scooped out long ago and never replaced. He entered the sheriff's office just before noon, spoke to no one, carried a sealed manila envelope, stayed behind closed doors with the current sheriff for over an hour. When he left, reporters tried to stop him. Questions flew like birds startled from trees. Did you know he was alive? Do you think it was someone on the force? What was in the envelope? Danner said nothing, not even a glance. He walked through them like they were mist, got in his truck, and drove off. He didn't go home. That house had long been sold. He didn't go to Tommy's mother. She had passed away 2 years earlier, never knowing the full story. He simply disappeared again. But the town remembered that look in his eyes, the weight of something known but unspoken. And they whispered a new question now, quieter than before, not just who took Tommy but who knew. Somewhere, someone had watched all those years, hidden behind windows, behind smiles, behind uniforms. An unseen watcher, a keeper of secrets, and maybe, just maybe, that watcher hadn't gone anywhere. The dispatch logs from July 22, 1992, were preserved on reel-to-reel tape, long before digital archives rendered physical records obsolete. Dust had settled thick over the storage boxes in the basement of the county communications center, the kind of dust that speaks of years, untouched, decades of neglect. No one had listened to the tapes in years. There had been no reason. The disappearance of Deputy Thomas Granger was old news until now. After the body was found beneath the interstate, after the forensic report whispered its impossible truth, a technician named Harris was assigned to revisit the old logs. His job was simple: listen, digitize, archive. He expected nothing. A mundane task at the edge of a firestorm. But when he reached the tape marked 23-0, the night Tommy vanished, something stopped him cold. At 11:07 p.m., the transmission crackled to life. Unit 6 responding. Mile 219, I-80 westbound. Vehicle pulled off shoulder, hazard lights active. Clear, calm. Tommy's voice, unremarkable. The dispatcher responded, routine. And then nothing. Except there wasn't silence, not exactly. In 1992, the tape had been labeled incomplete. The assumption had been a mechanical failure or a mic drop, static, a dead zone in the signal. That happened back then. But Harris, working with modern equipment, amplified the background, cleaned it up, ran it through filters that hadn't existed a decade ago. And what emerged from that ocean of static was something unmistakably human. Breathing. Shallow, uneven, close to the microphone. Not the steady rhythm of someone sitting in a cruiser. This was frantic, labored, panicked. followed by a low, nearly imperceptible thud. Then silence again. The timestamp was 11:09 p.m., 2 minutes after Tommy's initial report. It wasn't conclusive, not by itself. But to those who had been searching for answers in the dark for 9 years, it was everything. The county released nothing officially. But the audio leaked, as things like this always do. A local journalist posted a clipped version online. It spread quickly, people uploading their own versions, analyzing it like it was a secret code. Some claimed to hear another voice layered in, just at the edge of the spectrum, a whisper or a name. Most couldn't hear it, but all of them heard the breath. Theories bloomed like rot. Some said it was Tommy's final moment, captured by accident, a man realizing too late that something was wrong. Others believed he was already in the grasp of something, someone, and that the radio, left open, caught what was never meant to be heard. A few pushed the idea further, that the breath wasn't Tommy's at all. What if it was someone else? A presence, unseen, close, watching. The sheriff's department didn't comment, but someone inside leaked a copy of the tape's spectrum analysis. The waveform spiked twice, once at 11:07 during the call-in, and again at 11:09. The second spike corresponded not with speech, but with that low sound, like a hand brushing the mic, or something heavier. Carl Danner, reached by phone, refused to comment. The call ended before the first question could be asked. The radio, once believed to be the last tether to Tommy's normal patrol, now felt like something else entirely, a door left ajar. A crack in the silence. And the thing about cracks is that they let things seep through. Even years later. Even after death. Even if it's only a breath. Long before Tommy Granger vanished, and long before the highway cracked open to give him back, Interstate 80 had already earned a reputation among those who kept track of such things. Stretching nearly coast to coast, it was one of the great arteries of American movement: freight trucks, drifters, vacationers, the occasional fugitive. A river of rubber and speed and anonymity. It was a place where you could vanish, if you wanted to, or be made to vanish, if someone else did. The records weren't kept in one place. You had to stitch them together: small-town newspapers, faded police reports, missing persons flyers half forgotten in dusty corners of sheriff's offices across Nebraska, Iowa, Wyoming. They didn't connect easily, but once you looked hard enough, patterns emerged. Names, dates, gaps. Some were truckers who never checked in. Some were women last seen at gas stations off desolate exits. Some were teenagers who took the wrong ride on the wrong day. And a few too many were law enforcement officers on solo patrols who simply stopped responding. In the years after Tommy disappeared, a researcher from Lincoln compiled a private database of disappearances along the I-80 corridor. Her name was Gwen Morley, and she had lost her own brother off the same road in 1986. She never found him, but she found data, and the data spoke in whispers. Every 40 to 60 miles, roughly the distance between rural precincts, there was a spike, a vanishing. Sometimes the body turned up, sometimes it didn't, but the cause was always unclear. No suspects. No convictions, just silence. The corridor, as Gwen described it in her unpublished notes, was a ghost road built on blind spots. So many stretches of I-80 cut through vast, empty landscapes. Cornfields, plains, truck depots. Places where noise disappears and cell service fades, the perfect canvas for erasure. And the perfect location for someone who understands the rhythm of the road to hide something in plain sight. Tommy wasn't the first to disappear. And after the discovery of his body, it became harder to believe he was the only one buried beneath concrete. The very construction of the interstate, its endless repairs, repavings, reroutes, offered a chilling possibility. That beneath the infrastructure of progress, someone had been building a cemetery. One case out of Cheyenne stood out. A deputy vanished in 1994, cruiser found in a river. Body never recovered. Another, In Iowa 1998, a state trooper disappears after responding to a vehicle fire that had mysteriously extinguished itself. No trace, both within shouting distance of the interstate. Both dismissed as isolated incidents. But Gwen's research put them on the same map, marked with red pins and scribbled dates. She called them the Hollow Miles. Logistically, it made sense. Construction crews rotated. Subcontractors came and went. Paper trails were thin. A man with access, someone on the inside, could redirect a load of concrete, repave a surface, and leave no one the wiser. And if someone had a reason, revenge, secrecy, power, they could bury the truth, literally beneath the road, traveled by thousands every day. Looking back, it was never just about Tommy. His was the story that surfaced, but it wasn't the only one. The geography had always been telling a story. It was just that no one had been listening closely enough. Until the jackhammer struck something it shouldn't have. Until the road bled. In the back room of the county records building, where sunlight filtered through warped blinds and dust hung in the air like a second skin, a civil engineer named Lucas Brandt unfolded a yellowing stack of highway construction documents. He hadn't been assigned to the case. He wasn't a detective, or a journalist, or anyone tasked with unearthing buried secrets. But after the discovery of Tommy Granger's patrol car under I-80, something in Lucas stirred a memory, a gut tug he couldn't shake. He'd worked with the Department of Transportation in the late 90s, a junior project coordinator during one of the most aggressively funded repaving campaigns in state history. The job had come and gone, one project among dozens. But now, with Tommy's body found entombed under a stretch that should have been untouched, he needed to know what had gone wrong. The plans were kept in tubes stacked haphazardly like forgotten bones. Lucas spent 3 days sorting through contracts, permits, and inspection records. What he found shouldn't have been possible. According to official documentation, the section of highway at mile marker 223 had been scheduled for resurfacing in late 1997, but the crew that unearthed Tommy's car in 2001 had clearly cut through layers of concrete late in 1996. Lucas dug deeper. A supplemental file listed an emergency repaving in September of 1996, an unscheduled detour from the state's official repair cycle. No public record of the request. No emergency log by DOT. Just a field note, written in rushed penmanship. Surface degradation safety hazard. Approved for expedited concrete pour. Begin September 13, 1996. But there had been no rain that week, no freeze, no accident reports or photographs to justify the rush. And most curiously of all, the permit for the project was unsigned. The engineer of record box was blank. Lucas followed the paper trail backward. Every construction project required at least 2 tiers of subcontractors, one for surface removal and one for repaving. He checked the resurfacing vendor for that job. The name appeared 3 times across the 1996 documents. Archway Infrastructure Services. It meant nothing to him at first. But after a day scouring business directories and license databases, Lucas realized something strange. Archway no longer existed. In fact, there was no digital footprint at all. No tax ID, no dissolution notice, no employee records. As far as any official database was concerned, Archway Infrastructure Services had never existed. And yet, they were awarded a state contract to lay concrete over a section of highway where a missing deputy's body had just been found. He called in a favor from a retired auditor. Over lukewarm coffee, the man squinted at the blueprints and said something Lucas never forgot. Back then, there were always 2 or 3 ghost outfits bidding on side jobs. Most were real on paper, hollow in practice. You needed to know someone on the inside to even get one of those contracts. Lucas pressed further. One name recurred on the signed delivery slips for the concrete mix used that week: R. Keene. It wasn't listed under company ownership, not on any vendor rosters, just scrawled in the corner of several dispatch forms, over and over. R. Keene, same signature, same pen, a ghost name. When Lucas brought the files to the sheriff's office, he was told the case had been escalated to the state level. They thanked him for his time, promised to follow up. But something in the deputy's eyes said otherwise. The same kind of quiet warning you gave someone who asked too many questions near a burning fuse. That night, Lucas sat alone in his garage, staring at the blueprints stretched across the hood of his car. The paper rustled in the breeze from a cracked window, the old ink bleeding at the folds. There, on the page, beneath the grid lines and measurement notes, lay a hidden map, one that didn't chart miles or asphalt, but secrets. Buried deliberately. Poured over with intention. A repaving job that came too early. A company that vanished without a trace. A name that no one would claim. And somewhere beneath all of it, the blueprint of a cover-up. Laid out in concrete. It was raining the day Evelyn Danner opened the door. Not a storm, just a steady, whispering drizzle that painted the porch in cold gray and made every breath outside feel like waiting. She stood in the doorway with tired eyes and a sweater pulled around her thin shoulders, staring at the man from the sheriff's office like he was a stranger who had come to retrieve a ghost. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, careful. "I knew you'd come," she said. Eventually. The man Deputy Fletcher hadn't come to ask about Carl's death. That part was clean, natural, a heart that had grown too heavy to carry. No foul play, no mystery left to unwrap. But what Carl had left behind had unsettled more than it explained. After the autopsy report on Tommy Granger, after the tapes and the blueprints and the unspeakable possibility of captivity, someone had filed a request to search Carl's personal effects. Evelyn hadn't agreed at first. He was a quiet man, she'd said. But that didn't mean he didn't carry noise inside him. She led Fletcher to the garage. There, beneath a tarp and a stack of winter coats, sat an old wooden box oak, brass fittings, worn with time. It was locked, no key in sight. She hadn't opened it in the years since Carl had moved it there. "He told me once," she murmured, "that if anything ever happened to him, someone would come for it. He didn't say who, just someone." Inside, the air felt different. Damp, metallic, like paper left too long in shadow. Fletcher didn't say much. He took the box and left without ceremony. Evelyn didn't follow him out. She simply closed the door and stood in silence behind it. At the station, the lock was easy enough to pry open. What lay inside was not. There were notebooks spiral-bound, yellowed at the edges, filled with Carl's handwriting. Names, dates, crude maps, observations of abandoned barns, license plate numbers recorded at rest stops. He had been looking long after the department had stopped, searching not just for Tommy but for a pattern. And in the middle of the box, wrapped in a worn cotton handkerchief, was a stack of cassette tapes labeled in Carl's careful script, "Highway Static, Nights." They weren't police recordings. They were hours of CB chatter, dispatch bleed-over, and faint background noise from the shortwave radio he kept in his home after retirement. Most of it was nothing. But one section marked 2:17 a.m. Oct. 1998, held a voice that, though distorted and faint, sounded eerily like Tommy's. Just one word, spoken clearly, cutting through the static, cold. But it was the photo that changed everything. Tucked in the back of the box, inside a sealed envelope, was a photograph never before seen by anyone outside the box's wooden walls. It wasn't a patrol picture. It wasn't from a department ceremony or a family barbecue. It was candid, grainy, shot in low light. Tommy sat on what looked like a metal cot, his hair longer, darker at the roots, face thinner, cheeks hollow. He wore what might have once been a uniform shirt, now tattered and unbuttoned. And his eyes, those eyes that once smiled, easily stared past the camera. Empty, glassy, like someone who had forgotten what daylight looked like. On the back of the photo, Carl had written in pencil, "This was not an accident. No one could explain where the photo had come from. No timestamp, no metadata. Just the image of a man whose body had been found buried 5 years earlier than he should have been, looking older than he ever had the chance to be. Danner had known something. Maybe not everything, but enough to leave a trail. A box, not of answers, but of grief catalogued, fear transcribed. A box that asked a question no one was ready to answer. If Tommy Granger had lived, who took that photo? And who let him die? At first, Tommy Granger's disappearance was treated as a tragic anomaly, unexplained, yes, but singular. The kind of unsolved mystery that a small community folds into folklore after a while. But after the body was found, and the photo from Danner's box began circulating quietly through unofficial channels, investigators began to look backward. Not just at Tommy's case, but at the years surrounding it. A decade. 2. They weren't looking for answers anymore. They were looking for shadows. They didn't have to look far. In 1994, a deputy named Joel Mercer vanished while returning from a late shift in southern Iowa. His last radio communication was a routine call-in at 12:23 a.m. He never made it home. His cruiser was found 2 days later at a closed way station. Keys still in the ignition, radio still active. There was no sign of a struggle. No sign of Mercer. At the time, it was chalked up to foul play, perhaps a vagrant encounter gone wrong, maybe even a voluntary disappearance. Though no one truly believed that. The case went cold within months. In 1996, near Laramie, Wyoming, a highway patrol officer named Ruth Delgado failed to report in during a snowstorm patrol. Her route was short, familiar, and had been cleared just hours earlier. When search crews went looking, they found only tire tracks that vanished near an overpass. Her radio had been transmitting for nearly 10 minutes before it finally went to static. The sound? Wind. And beneath it, some claimed, a faint metallic clinking. Her file was never formally connected to Mercer's, or to Granger's. But now, they all shared a single, haunting thread. They were uniformed officers, traveling solo at night, along remote sections of the interstate system, most within spitting distance of I-80 or its feeder routes. All went missing without evidence of flight, struggle, or motive. And none were ever found. Until Tommy. When federal analysts were brought in after the forensic anomalies surrounding Granger's case, they mapped disappearances of law enforcement officers from 1985 to 2001 across 6 Midwestern states. A grim constellation emerged. Each point on the map, when connected, didn't form a perfect line, but it traced a corridor, one that curved and bent along the same highways stitched into the region's asphalt heart. The same corridors used for freight, for unregistered cargo, for construction material transport. Roads that offered both isolation and access, escape and concealment. They started calling them the Silent Seven. 7 officers, Granger included, who had vanished in a pattern no one wanted to admit existed. Because to admit it meant someone had been doing this deliberately. Selecting targets, waiting, removing them from the world without leaving a trace. Until now. The similarities were too exact. The disappearances always occurred during solo shifts, always at night, always near infrastructure undergoing or scheduled for maintenance. It wasn't just who was taken. It was when and where. The timing was everything. The roadwork gave cover, the darkness gave silence. And maybe the most chilling detail of all, none of them had ever used their sidearms. None had even drawn them. Whatever these officers encountered, it wasn't sudden, it wasn't violent, it was practiced, controlled, like someone was following a process. By the time the task force compiled their findings, a question loomed that no one could push away anymore. How many others? How many names had slipped through the cracks because no one thought to connect the dots? How many accidents, desertions, or unknown outcomes were something else entirely? Tommy Granger's discovery hadn't closed a case. It had opened a pattern. One that suggested he was never alone. Just the first to be found. Theories tend to grow like roots, first hidden, then unstoppable. When Tommy Granger's body was discovered beneath a state-managed stretch of I-80, the idea seemed outlandish at first. Coincidental. Horrific, yes, but surely isolated. But the deeper investigators and journalists dug into the anomalies surrounding his death, the harder it became to ignore the broader implications. This wasn't just a murder hidden beneath concrete. It may have been a method, a process, a system. Forensics had proven the body had been placed there years after Tommy's disappearance, sealed under concrete during a repaving project that was rushed and undocumented. That fact alone cracked the case open. But what lay beneath that discovery was far darker. If one body had been hidden beneath a federally funded road, who was to say it was the only one? And who had the power to do it more than once? Infrastructure is the perfect hiding place. Not because it's impenetrable, but because it's unexamined. The public drives over it. Construction crews build it. Government agencies approve it. And once it's done sealed over in steel and asphalt, no longer questioned. The perfect grave, one investigator quietly called it. Long, flat, and constantly moving. If you were to bury something in plain sight, what better place than beneath the road itself? The pattern of disappearances along I-80, and now adjacent routes, started to mirror state-led repaving projects from the mid-1990s through the early 2000s. A chilling trend emerged. Solo law enforcement officers going missing within days, sometimes hours of emergency highway maintenance. Records from that era were inconsistent. Some projects were logged without signatures. Others listed subcontractors that no longer existed. One job in Wyoming in 1994 listed the same ghost company found on Tommy's records, Archway Infrastructure Services. No license, no tax trail, just a name printed on 3 separate state contracts and then gone. Some began calling it the burial theory. That certain individuals, maybe just one, maybe more, had been using state infrastructure projects as cover to entomb victims. Under the guise of maintenance, they could control the worksite, pour concrete over a corpse, and leave behind nothing but a road ready for traffic. A permanent grave hidden beneath utility. It felt absurd. Until it wasn't. A geophysical survey team, using ground-penetrating radar, quietly surveyed a mile stretch of I-80 near where Tommy was found. No official announcement was made. But weeks later, a source inside the investigation leaked that anomalies had been detected: dense, irregular pockets of material inconsistent with standard road layering. The areas were marked, nothing excavated. Not yet. The logistics, they said, were complicated. But those close to the case knew what it meant. This wasn't about one man anymore. This was a latticework of grief and silence, paved over in the name of progress. The road itself had become a mausoleum, a network of sealed tombs hiding not just bodies, but the stories of those who disappeared without a trace. And somewhere in all of it, a metaphor settled like dust in the lungs. Grief paved over. Evidence turned to road. They had built highways over heartbreak, and kept driving. It begins in the dark. No Sunday, no ticking clock, just the flicker of fluorescent light overhead, humming faintly, irregular, as if powered by something dying. The air is stale, thick with the breath of machines and concrete, a smell like wet paper and rust. Somewhere, water drips steadily, a lonely metronome counting out hours that never end. Tommy Granger opens his eyes. Maybe this is how it was, maybe not. There is no proof, no footage, no written record of his final days, only imagination built from the fragments he left behind. But in the quiet places where facts run dry and the mind turns inward, this is the version that survives. The emotional truth of what might have been. He tries to move. The chain is not long, but long enough to allow him a few steps toward the corner. A bucket. A mattress, thin as gauze, laid across a wooden platform bolted to the floor. A tray, sometimes. Food, not warm, not fresh, but consistent. Rice, soft vegetables, a slice of bread that grows mold if he forgets to eat it fast enough. Someone feeds him. Always from the other side of the door. Never a voice. Just the mechanical click of the lock, the tray sliding forward, the retreating footsteps. He speaks sometimes, though he forgets what his voice sounds like. He says his name over and over again, like a tether to the world outside. Deputy Thomas Granger, badge number 22317. A ritual, a mantra. Something to keep the walls from swallowing him. He dreams of roads. Endless, sunlit highways. Patrols where the wind sang through the cracked window, where the radio crackled with friendly voices and the horizon always promised something new. He dreams of Carl's voice beside him, low and steady, offering quiet wisdom between sips of gas station coffee. He dreams of his mother's porch, the creak of the old swing, the smell of supper waiting through the screen door. But when he wakes, there's only concrete. Time becomes a loop. Sometimes there's light, sometimes there's not. He marks days by how often the tray returns. 1 meal, 2, then silence. Then it begins again. His body grows thin, his hair long, his beard wild. At some point, he forgets how long it's been. At some point, he stops asking when it will end. He hears voices, but they don't speak to him. Footsteps above. Machinery. The dull tremble of trucks passing overhead. The faint vibration of the living world, still moving while he stays buried. Maybe he screams. Maybe he forgets how. And then, one day, the door opens. Not with the careful quiet of the feeding hand, but with purpose. Boots on concrete. A presence. Heavy. Final. No words exchanged. Just the sense that something has reached its conclusion. What happens next is unclear. The record ends here, but we know the rest. He is placed in his old cruiser, still in uniform, belt fastened, a radio, broken, a badge, still warm with memory. He is sealed in steel, lowered into a trench carved for a road no one will remember by name. Concrete poured thick, smoothed, painted. The world above continues. And Tommy Granger is sent on his last patrol motionless, voiceless, still sworn to protect the road that became his grave. No headlines, no eulogies. Just silence. And the slow hum of tires rolling on overhead. The thing about roads is that they're never truly permanent. Concrete settles. Asphalt cracks. Time warps the surface, no matter how carefully it's laid. Even highways built with steel and precision eventually yield to pressure, to weather, to the shifting ground beneath. What was meant to stay smooth begins to fracture, and in those fractures, things buried deep begin to stir. The road above Tommy Granger had held its secret for years. Layers of concrete, tar, and silence pressed down against the truth until it became part of the infrastructure. Thousands of cars passed overhead, their drivers unaware of what lay beneath their tires. No one could hear the echo sealed under 30 inches of pavement. No one thought to listen. But concrete doesn't forget. It only waits. After Tommy's discovery, state officials reopened the case. Not just his, but others. A joint task force was assembled, stitched together from FBI analysts, state police, and forensic engineers. They gathered in conference rooms lit by fluorescent bulbs and stared at maps filled with pins and timelines. They pulled old records from county boxes, crumbling permits, incomplete work orders, names of subcontractors no one could locate anymore. For a while, it seemed like momentum might build into something more. But momentum has a way of slowing when it collides with systems too old or too reluctant to change. Leads withered under scrutiny. Records were missing, or had never existed in the first place. Names listed on contracts turned up dead, retired, or anonymous. The photo of Tommy, older and broken, was analyzed endlessly, but no one could trace its origin. The shadow behind him couldn't be identified. The background showed nothing useful, just blank cement, unremarkable, cruelly neutral. The engineer's blueprints suggested other anomalies, places where similar rushed paving projects had taken place under questionable circumstances, but when those sites were surveyed with ground-penetrating radar, the findings were inconclusive. Disturbances, yes, irregularities, but not enough to justify the cost or risk of tearing up a highway used by thousands, not without certainty. And certainty was the one thing no one could provide. The task force disbanded quietly 6 months later. Officially, the investigation remained open. Unofficially, it was cold. The kind of cold that settles deep in the bones, that whispers nothing will be done. But something had shifted. Locals began to watch the road differently. Where once there had been indifference, now there was unease. When a patch of highway buckled or cracked, people asked questions. When crews arrived to pour fresh asphalt, some stood and watched longer than they used to, trying to see what lay underneath. Rumors never stopped, they only changed shape. Some said they'd seen other faces in the cracks. Glimpses of something wrong in the shimmer of summer heat above the pavement. Others said the road itself had begun to resist potholes opening like mouths, lines warping like veins, grief expressing itself in fractures. Because the road doesn't forget. It bears the weight of what we refuse to name. And every time the earth shifts beneath it, every time the surface breaks just a little more, it's not just wear and tear. It's memory, pushing upward, trying to be seen. The clouds hang low and swollen over the flat horizon, casting a sullen shadow across the highway that stretches endlessly in both directions. Wind curls through the tall grass by the roadside, lifting dust and dead leaves into lazy spirals. The light is sickly, dimmed, not by dusk, but by the storm building in the western sky. Slow, inevitable, like a truth long denied. Evelyn Granger stands alone at the edge of the pavement, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on a point that no longer bears a marker. The memorial sign once placed here was taken down years ago, rusted through, forgotten. She asked them not to replace it. The spot doesn't need a sign. She knows where he is. Underneath her feet, beneath 3 layers of asphalt, insulation, and time, lie the remains of her son. What's left of him. What was left for her. She has imagined it too many times to count. The shape of the crushed car, the uniform still clinging to bone, the hollow space where his voice used to be. They offered to rebury him properly after the discovery, to place him in a cemetery with a stone, with prayers. She declined. He's already there, she said. Where they put him. She couldn't bring herself to move him from that place. Not because it was right, but because it was true. A truck barrels past, a blur of chrome in motion. The ground trembles briefly. She doesn't flinch. She has stood here in every kind of weather. In blistering heat, in snow so deep it swallowed her boots, in silence so complete it made her breath feel intrusive. But this day feels different, heavier. The sky is saying something. The wind seems to carry whispers of a story that still hasn't finished telling itself. 9 years they looked for him. And all along, he was just under the road, entombed in the very infrastructure he once swore to protect. The irony had cut her open when they first told her. Now it simply aches, a dull pressure that never quite fades. She remembers him in his uniform, so young it almost looked like a costume, so proud he stood straighter than necessary. She remembers the way he smiled with his whole face. The way he never said goodbye, only, "I'll see you later." And for a long time, she believed that. Now, she looks at the cracked surface beneath her feet, and wonders if she had ever truly known the world she lived in. If the roads, the people, the system itself, had always been this hollow, If Tommy's disappearance had only exposed what had always been there, decay disguised as order, she wonders how many others are buried in plain sight. How many mothers wait by doors that will never open? How many secrets have been sealed beneath the places we drive every day, blind to what lies beneath? The first drops of rain hit the shoulder with a faint patter, darkening the asphalt like bruises. Thunder rolls in the distance, low and rolling, like the voice of something ancient waking from sleep. She closes her eyes for a moment, and in the rhythm of the wind, she almost hears it again. His voice, faint and unfinished, calling through the static. There is no resolution, no true justice, only the dull weight of knowing. The case has ended, but the story hasn't. Because stories like this don't end, they haunt, they linger. And somewhere, just below the surface, more pages wait to be turned. Because the road stretches on. And we're left asking, not just what happened to Tommy Granger, but what else lies beneath.